What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of Games Up Podcast. My name is Cameron, and it's just me this week because it has been an incredibly busy week for everyone here at Games Up. And as E3 gets closer, we need a little bit more time to just smooth stuff out. So you're stuck with me. Also, if I sound a little bit gruffer than usual this week, sorry. I spent a bit of my weekend at Slam Dunk Festival, so my voice is a little bit hoarser than usual. But big shout outs to Slam Dunk because that was fun. Let's dive right in as we do every week, whether it's me and Lewis, or Lawrence, and lots of other bollocks. Let's dive in, as we do every week, with the news, and the first piece of news this week is that the Xbox Game Pass has been fully detailed. The Pass is a Netflix-style service for games, where you pay a fee and get access to a lump amount of games, and you play them, and you have access to all of those games for that fee. It is quite literally a Netflix-style service for games, and the details are thus. The Game Pass will launch on June 1st with 100-plus games. In fact, some of them are really, really good. There's Halo 5, which I've been tempted to look at for a while for the multiplayer. There's Sunset Overdrive, which is legitimately one of the best games on the Xbox One. Don't pass it up. It's so good. There is a bunch of the backwards compatible Gears of War games. There is some Bioshock games. There's some Assassin's Creed games. There's some genuinely really good stuff on this pass, so it looks awesome. It launches on June the 1st, as we said. You can get a 14-day free trial, but be aware to get it, you do have to put in some kind of payment method, so like a credit card number or a debit card number. I'm assuming it's one of those cases where you put the number in, then they give you the trial for free, but then they automatically renew it unless you cancel. I may be wrong about that, but just keep your eye out. I haven't started my trial for those reasons, so I don't know. I'm assuming that's the case. Keep an eye out for it either way if you do intend to start your free trial as a result of what you've heard here. You do have to put a credit card number in. But that's the Xbox Game Pass. It genuinely seems quite a positive service. It seems like it's having a positive launch. So good. Cool. Let's see how it goes in the future. The next piece of news starts with an apology from us, but you'll see why in a second. Alan Wake has returned to digital storefronts and is now once again downloadable on the Xbox One and the Xbox 360, which is pretty contrary to the news that we put out about a week or a couple of weeks ago, saying that Alan Wake was kind of going to disappear forever. We didn't know any better. Nobody else did. In fact, Alan Wake has returned this week and being downloadable on the Xbox One and 360. And it seems like what was built up to be a big problem of licensing has actually been solved really quickly. Now, if we were to assume no ill will on the developers and the publishers, maybe this is just a case of them not understanding how quickly the licensing problem would be solved here, and they thought they'd kind of tell people and be honest and transparent about it. If we're assuming a little bit of kind of PR play on the developers, making it seem like a game was going to disappear forever is a very good way of getting good promo, and I imagine they picked up a fair few amount of downloads off that. Either way, Alan Wake has not disappeared forever, it turns out. It is back on storefronts, and so if you went out and kind of rush bought it as a result of anything you heard on this show or an extension of anything you heard, sorry. We were only reporting on what the news was at the time, as was everybody. And now the news is that the licensing issue has been fixed and it's back on stores. So that's a good thing, but also kind of a shady thing. Sorry. The final big piece of news this week was the reveal of Far Cry 5, which before we go anywhere else looks awesome. It looks so cool. Far Cry 5 is a modern western set in Hope County, Montana. It focuses around a set of white Christian religious fundamentalists in the middle of America who seem to be forcing a very, very extreme version of Christianity on Hope County through acts of violence and fear, and generally kind of Far Cry baddie motives. Now, the reveal for Far Cry 5 came at the start of the week when a live-action trailer was posted to a number of Ubisoft social media accounts. You remember that live-action trailer we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Red Dead one? Yeah, turns out it's not Red Dead. In fact, it's actually Far Cry because Red Dead got delayed until next year. The game that's coming out this year is a major part of a franchise and is set in the West. Turns out to be Far Cry. Who'd have thought it? But the game is set in Hope County, Montana, as we said, and we don't know when we're going to hear more about it. We don't know when it's coming out, but it seems fair to assume that we'll hear more at E3. In fact, Ubisoft have basically confirmed as much in financial meetings, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the reveal of this Far Cry game has come with some pretty heavy controversy, and we thought that what we would do in this week's episode, as it's a lighter episode in terms of length, was to outline the differing sides of this controversy and maybe give our opinions on it. The reason that this controversy has reared its head is because there are a group of people who have seen the reveal of Far Cry 5 and mainly seen the reveal of its very clearly white, very clearly Christian, very clearly middle American antagonists. They believe that this is an example of Ubisoft pushing progressive politics. So let's give a little bit of background information on this. The video game industry is very, very left-wing leaning. So for anyone who doesn't understand right and left in terms of politics and the political scale, Donald Trump would be said to be on the right side of politics, arguably the very right side of politics. That's the far right. And on the other side, on the left or the far left, you have somebody like Bernie Sanders, or in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn. And if you want a UK alternative, somebody on the far right might be Nigel Farage, or Theresa May is edging herself closer to there with every day, but she's definitely on the right of politics. And that's how the swing goes. Left tends to be more progressive, and right tends to be more conservative, both in terms of finance and social issues. So the video game industry has tended to be very left-wing, quite openly, quite publicly left-wing. And there's probably reasons for this. The video game industry is a very young industry. Video games are still a very young medium, so they're being developed by young people. Video games and the video game industry typically has left-wing leanings and left-wing voices. Now, some people have looked at the Far Cry trailer, seen that Middle American Christian fundamentalists are being painted as the antagonists, and connected that to the Middle American Christians who may be connected to the right-wing voters that voted Trump in the recent election. And there are some connections to be drawn there. Trump got a lot of his voters from Middle America, and those Middle American states tend to frequently vote red, and voting red in America is the equivalent of voting right. Because that's voting for the Republicans. Ironically, if you are listening to this from America, totally different here in the UK. Red is Labour, who are the left, and blue are Conservatives, who are the right. But I'll stop going on about that. So the reason that this controversy has reared its head is because there are people who have seen Ubisoft pushing white Christian fundamentalist Americans as the antagonists, and drawn the conclusion from that Ubisoft are painting white people generally as the bad guys. And if you want to extend this even further, that Ubisoft are painting white Christians as bad guys. The other side of this controversy is suggesting that people have seen this, that the people who are angry at this are connecting dots and jumping to conclusions or putting intentions in Ubisoft's mouth that weren't their intentions at all. So on one side of this controversy, you have a group of people angry at the presentation of a white, strongly religious person as an antagonist, and on the other side of this controversy, you have a group of people who are saying that these people have seen a white person as an antagonist, connected that to a social context, put intentions and conclusions into Ubisoft's mouth that they are trying to present a certain group of people as bad guys and a certain group of real-world people as bad guys. So that, I think and I hope, is a good summary of the controversy that's going on, and I hope that it sort of gives a little bit of clarity to both sides, and I hope it's presented fairly. I'm gonna now talk about my opinion of this controversy, and I'm gonna say before I do so, I haven't discussed this with any other member of Games Up. If you disagree with me, you don't necessarily disagree with them, and I'm presenting it as my opinion, so take that as you will. I think, firstly, it's far too early to jump to conclusions about this game. The first thing that we have seen of this game, the first few things that we've seen of this game are a few character reveals, which look really interesting, a reveal trailer and a teaser trailer. And whilst they give us an understanding of the tone of the game, and they give us an understanding of the atmosphere of the game, they don't give us an understanding of the twists and turns that will take part in the story and the narrative. Far Cry games tend to be long games, and Far Cry 4 is a great example of this. They tend to be anywhere from 8 to 15 hours long, especially as you dive into the lore that's put into each of the locations that Far Cry is in. And I think that to jump to conclusions about the motivations of the antagonist and therefore the linkable real world context of these motivations and who might be being presented as good or bad, it's far too early to jump to these conclusions. We haven't even seen gameplay from the game, never mind understanding the deep and complex narrative turns that might happen. They might not, but they might. For reference, I'll present Pagan Min, who is presented as a very cut and dry bad guy in the trailers for Far Cry 4. But actually, if you play through Far Cry 4 and you play through all the different endings and all the different ways you can get to those endings, trying to sort of skirt around spoilers as easily as I can, but all the different ways you can get to those endings, actually you can see a few different shades of Pagan. Now, he's undeniably shown to be an antagonist, and his actions are undeniably bad, but you kill as many people as the good guy as he kills, and the conclusions you get to at the end leave it a little bit more up for interpretation about who's actually doing bad things here. It's just who's being presented as a protagonist, as an antagonist. So, whilst these trailers are very clearly presenting somebody as an antagonist, that might not necessarily represent entirely what they are in the full game. It might not represent their full character arc, and it certainly might not represent how we interact with them in the game. And those are really, really important. Presenting somebody as an antagonist in a game trailer is very different to presenting them as an antagonist in a movie trailer, for example. In a movie trailer, you can look at somebody and know that they are the bad guy, because a movie is a passive piece of media. When you watch it, if you look away, the movie will still keep going and that person will still progress. Now, if they change in the storyline, they'll change in the storyline, but that's not because of the way you interact with them. Whereas in a video game, if you don't interact with certain characters, you might not see certain narrative threads. And so, as a result, jumping to conclusions about how somebody is presented in a trailer is very, very difficult to justify when it comes to a video game, because it's literally shaped by the way you play the game and the way you interact with it. In terms of the real life context of this story and what it might be drawing reference from, what it might be hinting to, and what arguable comparisons you can draw, there are some really interesting ones. Terrorism and its perceived links with religion, no matter which religion it be, is something that's on more and more people's minds right now. There are people at the minute making arguments on both sides of terrorism that it doesn't represent one religion or another, or that it can represent the more violent nature of an organized religion around a single group of beliefs. That's a very, very deep argument and discussion to get into, and it's not something that I'm going to give a huge amount of time to right now. But what I will say is that I think there are comparisons to be drawn to real life extremist groups in America. And by extremist groups, I mean, for example, the Westboro Baptist Church. The Westboro Baptist Church are a group of Christian worshippers who are known to be controversial in their actions, and I would make the argument that they're known for acting controversially in certain events and environments. They're known to picket certain events, whether they be military funerals or concerts for certain advocates for progressive politics, and they do so with strongly worded religious messages. There's a really interesting comparison, I think, to be drawn here from the very amplified video game expression of this, i.e. people literally murdering other people, people drowning other people, as an example of forced baptism, that kind of thing, to the much more mundane, but still I would argue extreme, unpleasant, and in my opinion wrong, nature in the way that extreme groups like the Westboro Baptist Church conduct themselves. I think that if Ubisoft is intending to draw parallels to any kind of real-world group, they're more likely to be doing it for groups like these, where these groups are acting extremely in the name of one religious belief or another, rather than drawing comparisons to real-life groups such as broad as race. A great deal of this controversy came from the fact that people thought this was a bad way to present white people, and I don't think it's in Ubisoft's intentions to be presenting the entire white race as antagonists. Another part of this controversy was that people were angry that you could, within Far Cry, choose to kill innocent civilians, and those innocent civilians would be white Americans. Personally, I think that's a bit of a flimsy argument because I think people haven't made the same bones or outrage about killing innocent civilians in the other Far Cry games, and I'd argue that the context is very similar. You're killing an innocent civilian in one location or another, it's just the location that's changed and the race of the people within it that's changed. I'd also argue that people haven't made the same grievances or outrage with Grand Theft Auto, which has been based in America, and one of the big selling points of the game for a long time was being able to have the freedom to kill civilians. Ironically, one of the things that made Grand Theft Auto popular was the sandbox nature of the game and the crazy kind of scenarios you could get into. The kind of things that you could do, killing people with cars and crazy weapons. And much the same, Far Cry got popular because of the crazy situations you could get into with the animals and the flying vehicles and the landscapes. I think it's interesting that this outrage has sparked itself now because of the arguably more sensitive political and social culture that we find ourselves in. If I had to draw a conclusion from this, I think I would say I can understand the perspective of somebody who sees a white Christian, something that they can relate to, being presented not only as an antagonist, but an antagonist so amplified that they're murdering people for their beliefs. But I don't think that Ubisoft are going out of their way to target an individual group. I think they're telling a story. And I think that story revolves around something that maybe can have links drawn to real world contexts like the Westboro Baptist Church, but is not inherently them. This is not the Westboro Baptist Church being presented in a game. This is not Trump voters being presented in a game. This is not Middle America being presented in a game. It is a story that perhaps has parallels that can be drawn to single instances of these things. It's not the same thing. And I think that before we draw any of these conclusions, what we should do is get the game, play the game, and see what actually happens in it. See what kind of relationships we draw with these characters, find out what their motivations are, find out what their conclusions are, and generally form an opinion on the finished game rather than a few trailers beforehand. I think it's really important at this point to say that no matter your opinion on this controversy and my thoughts on it, I think it's really important that we make sure that controversies like this don't overshadow the ability for developers to continue telling stories within their games. This game and this story is really important, but it's as equally really important as the generic American military fiction that comes out of Call of Duty, for example. It's as important as Star Wars Battlefront. It's as important as Gone Home. It's as important as BioShock. It's really, really important, in my opinion, that controversies like this don't overshadow the ability for developers and artists in any field of media to continue telling stories. If those stories have implications within the real world, perhaps we need to discuss them, perhaps we need to debate them, and perhaps we even need to debate politics and society as an extension of them. But I think it's really important that we continue to allow and respect developers who go out of their way to make these stories, even if we agree with them or disagree with them. To put my colours on the table, I really like the way that Far Cry is going. I'm very excited to see what this game becomes, and I'm really, really interested to see this story. I wouldn't align myself with anything near the right of politics. I wouldn't align myself with any particular religion, and I certainly wouldn't align myself with Trump's politics. Nonetheless, I'm more excited to play this story and this Far Cry game because I'm very excited to see how Ubisoft present the setting and the dynamics of the characters within that setting. Something that I love about all the Far Cry games is that the characters and NPCs within the games always feel organic and always feel like they fit into the world that's being presented. Montana and Hope County is a very different kind of place than Peru and the islands that came before in Far Cry 3. So I'm fascinated to see how these characters and their dynamics are presented within this game. So that was a heavy topic, but that's my opinions and hopefully a somewhat round presentation beforehand of the controversy currently happening with Far Cry 5 and perhaps a conclusion that can be drawn from it. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of the show. We hope that you enjoyed listening to Games Up generally, and if you do so, we would love to have you like the show, because that lets us know that we're doing good stuff, or just stuff that you enjoy, and that keeps us going a little bit. And if you do like what you've heard, please consider coming to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/GamesUpcast. We also have a Twitter page, which is the same, at GamesUpcast. And you can always subscribe to the show, whether you are on iTunes this morning or YouTube this evening, because we launch iTunes in the morning and YouTube in the evening, because we'd hate for you to miss an episode. We put one of these out Monday morning on iTunes, Monday 6:30 on YouTube. And until next week, hopefully when we have a much lighter topic where we can just talk about real cool games as we get closer to E3. Thanks very much, and man alive, the game's up.